turn back to you.
Well, it is awesome to be here at the Erwin campus this morning, and we got the privilege of having Chris Bogart at Springbrook this morning, so I know they're enjoying that. And so, again, it's great to be with you guys. We've been in this series, Junk Drawer Theology, and we've been talking about some of the things that we believe about God or we believe about the Bible that we just kind of pick up along the way, like the stuff we have in our junk drawers, the stuff you just kind of gather. And when you really start looking at what's in your junk drawers at times, you think, man, a lot of this stuff just needs to be tossed. And that's really what we're talking about in this series, Junk Drawer Theologies. We're talking about some of those ideas, some of those beliefs that we picked up about God or we picked up about the Bible that we just kind of gathered up along the way, because that's just kind of generally how a lot of people think. And we've tossed it in there and we've just kind of hung on to it, and maybe it just really needs to be tossed. And we've talked about several really good ones. We've talked about the idea that it really doesn't matter what you believe, that ultimately everybody kind of gets to God anyhow, no matter what they believe. All religious paths kind of lead to God. We've talked about that one. We've talked about it really doesn't matter what you do as long as you don't hurt anybody. And that's a common view that we have in our culture that we just kind of collected and tossed in our theological junk drawer. But we talked about it doesn't really matter what you do as long as you just don't hurt anybody. And then we kind of dispelled that one. And then we also talked about one like, hey, we're all just children of God, right? Everybody's a child of God, which is something that you hear a lot in our culture as well. If you missed any of the ones that we talked about so far, you can go back to the website, northridgenetwork.com, click on the media tab and catch up. Or actually, you can download the Northridge One app, which is more and more becoming a very, very useful tool. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And you can listen to all the different topics there by campus as well. As we launch into this one today, let me ask you a question. If at the first of the year, you just want to get ripped, okay, at the first of the year, you decide, you know what, I've had it with what I've done to myself. Man, I'm going to get ripped. I'm going to get jacked. How would you go about that? What would be your kind of plan to do that? I looked on Amazon. There are over 2,600 books about weightlifting on Amazon. 2,600 books. So, you might start there, because like if you're like me, you just think, well, okay, I'm going to start lifting weights. So I'll literally just pick up weights and lift them. Is there a method to this? What's the best way to do this? If I want to work in certain areas, what's the best way to do that? So it might need a book, right? So let's say we go to Amazon and we get the one that's got the highest rated, it's got all the stars, got all the great reviews. So we start there, right? So we get a great book, but we're learning principles again, but maybe we don't exactly know how we should apply those or what's the best way to go about that. And so maybe we get a trainer, we get somebody to explain the principles to us. So if we've got a great book and we got a great trainer, we're automatically ripped, right? No, you still actually have to go out and you have to actually work out, right? You don't just get ripped by just learning about things, right? Or by having somebody else explain them to you. And that brings us to today's item in the junk drawer, which is the more you know, the more you grow. The more you know, the more you grow. This is a very pervasive view that we have in our culture today. But here's the thing about it. I personally believe that this particular view, the more you know, the more you grow, is doing actually a ton of damage to our spiritual growth. I actually really believe that. And this is so pervasive through our culture that it's really, really hard to detox from. It's really hard to get this out of our system, because for decades we've structured our churches around this concept right here. The more you know, you will automatically grow. We've actually structured our churches around this. 20 years ago, it was very typical. What you would normally do if you were a growing Christian is you would go to church 3 times a week, right? 3 times a week, you show up to church, you listen to the professional Christian deliver food to you, spiritual nourishment to you, and you would lap that up, and that would hopefully grow you. But we wouldn't be done with that. Nowadays, you go 1 time a week for a church service. So, you're getting 3, that's enough, right? Well, no, we're not done. Before one of those, you go to a Sunday school class. And in a Sunday school class is where somebody who's just barely a notch down from the preacher, because we wouldn't trust just anybody to teach a Sunday school class, somebody who's just barely a notch down from the preacher is going to deliver a 45-minute lecture to you. So you're going to get even more information. You're going to get fed and fed and fed and fed and fed. But wait a minute, we're not done. We got to have something for folks to do while their family members are in choir practice. And so on Sunday evenings during choir practice, we're going to create a training union or a discipleship hour. And we're going to dump more and more and more information. That's when we're really going to go deep. And all of that information was wonderful information. But we would also maybe be signed up for a men's group or a women's group as well on top of that. And we got all this great information. But in the end, what it really did was it did what it was designed to do. It made a lot of Christians great at Bible trivia. It did. We rocked it. You ever like Ken Jennings? Remember when Ken Jennings was just rocking Jeopardy? You see people like that, and they just know something about everything, and they hit the Bible category, and they don't know the difference between Moses and Noah. But Christians, man, we know all that stuff. We got all the details, right? But in the meantime, something really interesting happened. Christians kept having affairs at the same rate. The divorce rate among church people didn't go down. In all of those decades of taking this approach of the more you know, the more you grow, and 4 and 5 times a week, we are going to feed you and feed you and feed you and feed you. After all of that, there weren't a lot of appreciable changes in the lives of the people that were going to church. And churches just continued to just kind of, push political stances and push, preach at the world and tell the world that they were wrong. And all the while, the percentage of people going to church in America just keeps dropping and dropping and dropping and dropping to the point that right now we have the lowest percentage of people involved in church we ever have. But for decades, we had tons of Christians that were knowing more and knowing more and knowing more. And yet it didn't seem to make a huge impact in our culture. And in the process, what we've done is we've trained believers to demand deep teaching. And more teaching, more and more and more and more teaching. And that's why when somebody is looking for a church, it's not uncommon to hear somebody say, well, I'm looking for some deeper teaching. That's really what I'm looking for. When you're asked to serve in the children's ministry, it's not uncommon for somebody to say, man, I would love to do that, but here's the thing, I really need to be in church because I need to be fed. And you'll notice it's way easier to get people to sign up for another small group Bible study than it is to get them to connect with the lives of people who don't have a relationship with God. Because the more you know, the more you grow, and we all want to grow in our relationship with Christ, right? But what if it doesn't work that way? What if we're missing something that would radically change, radically revolutionize spiritual growth in America? I want you to look with me what the writer of Hebrews has to say in Hebrews 5, starting in verse 11. He says, we have much to say about this, but it's hard to make it clear to you because you no longer try to understand. If you're a parent, you just need to memorize that verse, right? Because that's really helpful. You can just say that to your kids almost every day, right? We have much to say about this, but it's hard to make it clear because you no longer try to understand. And then he says, in fact, although by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you the elementary truths of God's word over and over again. You need milk, not solid food. Anyone who lives on milk, being still an infant, is not acquainted with the teaching about righteousness. But solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. Now, at first glance, you look at this and you think, Jim, that's making exactly the point that the more you know, the more you grow. I mean, isn't that what he's saying? He's saying that people who know more and can handle the deeper truths, those are the mature Christians, and the other people are infants, they're spiritual infants. Isn't that the point that he's making? And so, obviously, the people who know the most are the most mature. I want you to look a little closer to the passage. He's comparing infants to mature Christians, and he's complaining that some people who have been Christians for a long, long time are still drinking milk for their nourishment. And yes, he is saying that they should by now be able to understand the deeper teaching. But I believe with all of my heart we're missing a few things that would revolutionize growth, our spiritual growth from this passage. And I think we're just looking at it on the surface and we're saying, oh, so the more you know, the more you grow. But I really think it says so much more than that. I think the first thing that we're kind of missing is the fact that not only can a mature person handle solid food, but a mature person can also feed themselves. The church is not your main source of spiritual nourishment. Let that sink in for a moment. The church is not your main source. That's earth-shattering to most of us, because for most of us, that's our entire plan. Again, that's why we say things like, I need a church that can feed me, because that is our sole plan. Man, I need a church that can nail it on my one day a week. I need a church that can just kill it because that is my plan. It's going to feed me, but a mature person feeds themselves. And when you think about it, that process starts really young in our lives, doesn't it? I mean, you think about, you put a toddler in a high chair and you put some chunks of food in front of them, and they take their clumsy mitts and they start scooping it up and shoving it in their mouths, and 50% of it gets in their mouth and 50% of it gets on the floor. But what are they doing? Early on, they're starting to get that skill of feeding themselves. They're not doing a great job of it, but they're starting. If you got a healthy 35-year-old guy and his mom is still flying food around on a spoon, calling it an airplane and saying, open the hanger, you got a problem, right? You got a problem. But I mean, as toddlers, we start shoving food in our own mouths. That's why I say all the time, Sunday mornings should be like eating out or a Sunday meal at grandma's. Every Sunday, we try to bake up something awesome for you. Every single Sunday at all of our campuses, that's what we are trying to do. We're trying to give you something that's practical and usable and tasty. I mean, that's what we're trying to do for you. But you've got to feed yourself through the week, right? A lot of people walk away from Sunday meal at grandma's or eating out on a Sunday, and they go to Logan's and they eat too many of those rolls, and they walk over there and say, man, I'm not going to eat for a week. You're a liar. Yes, you are. It's Sunday night. You're going to eat something. You're going to get in the refrigerator. You're going to rustle up some leftovers. You're going to have the Sunday night bowl of cereal, but you're going to eat something. You are going to feed yourself. And here's a news flash for you. If you're not feeding yourself through the week, there is no church that can keep you spiritually nourished. It's impossible. If all you ever did literally was eat Sunday meal at grandma's and you did what you say, I'm not going to eat for a week, you would not be nourished. So yes, learning is important. It's a huge part of your spiritual growth. But the most important learning that you can possibly do is the kind of learning that you do on your own. And so I want to encourage you to start that habit. I want to encourage you, if you're not regularly feeding yourself, one of the things that you can do, again, is download the Northridge One app. That's the name of the app, Northridge One. And when you download that, it has the Bible app already in it. Like literally, I have deleted my Bible app because I don't need it now. It's already in the app. And you can continue the same Bible reading plans that you had set up on that. You can just sign in and continue to use those. But you can set up Bible reading plans and just start feeding yourself. One of the things that I posted last week when I preached this message at Springbrook was I posted on the Springbrook Northridge page, Facebook page, an article from, I think it was Campus Crusade, about how to have a quiet time with God. I want to encourage you to go out there and read that. How to start that process of having a quiet time with God, because you've got to start that walk yourself. You've got to get in a habit of feeding yourself. No matter how smart you get, no matter how many facts you gather from how many preachers you listen to or how many podcasts you listen to, no matter any of that, if you're not feeding yourself, you are not a mature Christian. The second thing I think we overlook here in this passage that is a huge part of our spiritual development is the expectation that we would feed other people. He directly says that in the passage. He says, by now you should be feeding other people. That's the kind of maturity that I'm looking for. I'm looking for the kind of maturity where you're investing in other people. Let's be honest, this is an area that most Christians just never step into. And I think part of the problem with that is part of the reason that they cry for more feeding. This is beginning to mature yourself. And so if you never mature yourself, you just keep crying for more feeding. Only babies cry every time they're hungry. Only babies always cry to be fed. But see, when a person becomes a mature adult, they start taking on the care of other people. And I think this might be the thing in human development. I think this might be one of the things that grows us and matures us more than anything else. You think about this. When you first leave your parents' house, it's a big deal. Right? I mean, that's a big deal. You leave your parents' house, you're kind of out on your own, but who are you concerned about? You're concerned about you. You're taking care of you. You think about it, when you get married, that's a huge life change, right? That's a big deal. But the other person is self-sufficient. Like, it's not like they can't exist. I mean, you say things like that. I can't exist without you. But yeah, you all can exist without each other. I mean, you can take care of each other. The other person doesn't need you to actually take care of everything in their lives. But what happens when you bring that little person home wrapped up in one of those little hospital blankets? That person is solely dependent on you. And all of a sudden, man, you grow up. All of a sudden, you're worried about the welfare of somebody else every minute of every day, and it just matures you so much. It's one of the reasons I say to my kids all the time, they say, well, Dad, I don't understand this, or Dad, I say, you know what, let me tell you why you don't understand, because you've never had to worry about anything but yourself, right? But all of a sudden, when you start taking that responsibility on, it grows you like crazy. A lot of us get stuck in this infancy stage where we're just always looking to other people to feed us. And all we do pretty much spiritually is just eat, sleep, and poop. That's just pretty much, we just get stuck in this phase. We never become active. We never begin to feed ourselves. We just keep looking for sources of food to feed us, and we never begin to feed other people. And I'm telling you, you are stunting your growth if that is your focus. I believe the number one reason that we don't move on to feeding other people is because we're lazy. That challenges us. That pushes us. It's so easy just to show up to church and expect to be fed and be done for the week, right? It's so easy to just keep looking for more sources of depth and more sources to feed us. But it's a whole different thing when we begin to take on the responsibility to feed somebody else. Your spiritual life can come alive like it never has when you begin to take on the responsibility of leading other people. And for some of you, that can start right here inside the church. You start taking on the role of being a small group leader. Guess what? You become a small group leader, and all of a sudden, you're concerned about the spiritual welfare and people taking next steps of all the people in your group. That's a huge maturing factor for you. You begin to lead students, or you begin to lead in the children's ministry here. And yeah, the preparation and the learning you have to do to invest in them may not be as high level, if you will, but you're now taking on the care and the concern and the development of other people. And it begins to grow you. It begins to mature you. And so connecting with people inside the church and investing in people inside the church is a huge way to start stepping up and investing in others, but also investing in people out in the community as well. Beginning to look around you and pray and say, God, man, who should I be having lunch with and getting to know more? And asking, hey, tell me your story. Tell me, is God doing anything in your life? And beginning to invest in those people. That grows you even more. Why? Because Christians are pretty much safe for us, aren't they? We come inside the church, or we lead a small group, we lead a children's group, and that's all pretty much safe for us. We're around people who are all kind of wanting the same thing, all pursuing the same thing, but all of a sudden, you start investing in people, you start getting to know people, you start praying for opportunities to have spiritual conversations and lead somebody that doesn't agree with you, that doesn't live like you. All of a sudden, man, that's so much more of a challenge. If you're a student here this morning, I really want to encourage you to start these habits right now. Right now. Listen, there are people in this room that would say to you, listen to what he is saying. You will miss years of a stagnant spiritual life if right now you will start saying, you know what, I'm going to feed myself. I'm going to get in the habit of feeding myself, and I'm going to get in the habit of starting to invest in other people. One of the things that we do as a church, as a network, is once you're fifth grade and up, we look and say, hey, you need to be getting involved on Sunday morning. You need to find a place to serve on Sunday mornings. You need to be on a rotation doing something and investing in other people. We take student mission trips because we want to train our students to put themselves out there in uncomfortable situations. We expect you to be a leader now because we believe if you're a leader, we don't have to worry about what you're following. Some of you as students, you're sitting there and you're just sitting around all the time going, man, I feel so tempted. I feel like I'm going to take some steps that I'm going to regret. Listen, when you become a leader, you don't have to worry about what you're going to follow. And so I want to encourage you right now, just sidestep all of those years of spiritual stagnation that a lot of us experience and start right now stepping up and leading other people and being a leader now. So the writer of Hebrews is showing us that to be mature, we need to feed ourselves, and we should be taking that next step of feeding other people as well. Think about that. It makes sense. Just in human, as far as how we function as humans as well, when a mom is feeding a baby, the purpose of taking in that solid food is to produce some kind of food that baby can take in as well, right? And so we don't just take in food just for ourselves, just to grow. The more you know, the more you grow. We take it in so that we can bless other people and we can grow other people as well. But I think the last thing that we're really missing from this passage is the concept of putting everything that we're learning into practice. This is a huge aspect of our spiritual growth that we can't overlook. It's not good enough just to know stuff. Here, again, look at this last verse in Hebrews 5. It says, but solid food is for the mature, who by what? You say it. Constant use have trained themselves. It doesn't say mature people are the people who know the most. That if you know the most, then you are the most mature person and you're the most discerning person. It says who by constant use. And so it's only by, again, Hebrews says mature person is the one who by constant use has trained himself to be discerning. A lot of us don't understand this. Like there are people that you know that know so much Bible, right? They know so much Bible, but it seems like that they kind of use that Bible to beat other people over the head. They don't ever talk about what their own issues are. They're not very authentic. They don't seem very discerning. And you wonder, what's going on? Because this person knows the Bible inside and out. It seems like they're constantly taking it out of context just to make things work out the way they want to. It seems like really they're more about selfishness than they are actually living out God's word. It's because they've never moved from just acquiring information to actually application. They've never taken that step. Listen to what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 8, starting in verse 1. He says, now about food sacrificed to idols. So I know a lot of you now, you're getting your pens out now because you're like, well, this is something I've been dealing with. But this was a big issue for them. And so he says, we know that we all possess knowledge. Now think about what he's saying here. Paul is saying, I'm about to clear something up for you. You guys are having all kinds of conflict over this issue, and so I'm going to now handle this issue. But the first thing I want to say is we don't have a knowledge shortage. We get it. Like we all understand what the Bible has to say. We understand all the principles. But here's what he says. Knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. Now, interesting. See, just packing our heads full of knowledge and never putting it into practice, never giving it out to other people and feeding other people, actually can have the opposite effect on your spiritual growth. It can make you proud, it can make you judgmental, inflexible, and make us full of ourselves. It's really easy to learn what God has to say, but it's really hard to live it sometimes, isn't it? And it's interesting, when you begin to try to put it into practice, what happens in your life? It humbles you. See, Paul says that knowledge puffs up. But when you actually begin to make the effort to put it to constant use, what happens? All of a sudden it humbles you. Because we are very cognizant all of a sudden of the fact that, man, I'm struggling, man. Without the power of God, there's no way that I can forgive like Jesus tells me to forgive. That there's no way that I can avoid making money the God of my life like Jesus tells me to avoid doing. There's no way that I can flee lust like God calls me to do without the power of God in my life, because it's hard. There's no way that I can put other people's needs ahead of my own needs like God asked me to do. In fact, that's Paul's solution in this passage. Paul says, hey, listen, we all have knowledge and we can all argue all day long that we have the freedoms to do it, and biblically you can't prove that we don't have the freedoms to do it. But you know what he says in the end? Why don't we just put our love for other people above everything else? Why don't we just live that out? Why don't we just live love? And that'll actually put all of our knowledge in the proper context. Some of the most frustrating people to deal with in ministry are people who just kind of know everything about the Bible, but they've got glaring areas where they're not living it out. But they always want to demand everything get structured around what they think. Again, they're more focused on the acquisition of knowledge than they are the application of it. And that's why the writer of Hebrews says that that's not maturity. No matter how much you know, that's not maturity. It's interesting because this passage says that by now they should be teaching others, but they need to be taught the basics again. You think about what this passage is actually saying. It's not saying these people don't know enough. In fact, that's what the writer is saying. The writer is saying, you know so much, you should be able to teach other people. You didn't just forget all the stuff you've been taught. You've gotten all kinds of great information. The writer of Hebrews, the problem that he has with this audience is that they're not living it out and they haven't moved on to feeding other people. And so the bottom line this morning is this: maturity is gauged by the goal. Maturity is gauged by the goal. When we're going to talk about, I want to be a mature Christian, we got to look at what the goal is. Maturity in anything, advancement in anything, is determined by the goal, right? If I want to be a Super Bowl winning Hall of Fame quarterback, there's certain things that I need to do. Now, I should study, right? Learning the game is a huge part. It's a huge part of becoming a successful quarterback. But there are people that are smarter than Peyton Manning at football that you've never heard of and have never been successful as an NFL quarterback. Because studying the game is a part of the process. If you take a kid in high school today and you say, listen, I'm your guy, I'm gonna teach you how to do this. You're gonna be the best quarterback of all time. And they say, okay, what are we gonna do? We're gonna study. That's all we're going to do. Study. Just study. Well, should I throw? No. Don't throw. Don't do that. Just study. Isn't that crazy? Like, it's a great part of the process. And to be a really great quarterback, you got to study. But if that all of a sudden is the whole plan, you're not going to come anywhere close to the goals that you have. So what's the goal? Jesus says it over and over again. In the Great Commission, he tells us that the goal is that we would go and make disciples and that we would teach them the things that Jesus taught and that we would lead them to make disciples. Basically, what he's saying is teach people to feed themselves, teach people to live it out, and teach people to teach it to other people, to invest in other people spiritually. See, the goal of maturity is reproduction. That's the goal of maturity. That's what you're heading for. And what's interesting is that Jesus' method of teaching his disciples involved heavy doses of having his followers live it out and go ahead and begin using it and investing it in other people right up front. In fact, Jesus had the opportunity to recruit in his inner circle, in that 12 people, that inner circle of disciples that he had. Jesus had the opportunity to recruit the people who knew the Bible inside and out. They were called the Pharisees. Do you know how many he recruited to be in his inner circle? None. None of them. He took people who weren't anywhere close to being scholars, and he turned them into world changers. I love Luke chapter 9 and Luke chapter 10. What you see in Luke chapter 9 is that Jesus, early in his time with his disciples, he takes his disciples and he sends them out and he says, I want you to go into the villages around. I want you to preach and heal people. They don't know a ton yet. They don't have near the education that the Pharisees have, but he sends them out. Like, we wouldn't have put them in charge of a Sunday school class in a regular church. We wouldn't have done that. We would have said, they need a few more years before they should start, teaching other people. That's what we would have said. These people they can't be leaders. They can't be deacons in the church. They don't know enough yet. And yet Jesus takes them and throws them out there. And you know what we find in Luke chapter 10? In Luke chapter 10, he sends 72 people out. Where did we get the other 60? From the uneducated people that we sent out into the villages. They actually recruited and brought more followers of Jesus in. And then Jesus takes that 72 and he sends them out and he just kind of throws them out there, and they only know the basics at this point. The other 60, they haven't been with Jesus hardly any time. At least the disciples maybe had a few months. And he throws those other 60 out there, and at this point they only know the basics, and he's already putting them in positions where they're serving and they're investing in other people spiritually. Why? Why is Jesus doing that? Because he knows it'll make them hungry to learn. In fact, they come back desperate. They come back and they say, Jesus, we ran into demons and we didn't know what to do. What are we supposed to do when we're in those kind of situations? They wouldn't respond to us. Now, you think if before Jesus sent them out, if he had a seminar on dealing with demons, you think a lot of them would have zoned out? They would have been like, yeah, dealing with demons, like that's ever going to come up. Yeah, I don't think so, But no, wait a minute. He threw them out there and they begin to face things they never imagined that they were going to face. And what happens? They come back and they say, Jesus, tell us something. And Jesus says, now I'm going to give you some information. And they're like, great, we need it. I'm going to tell you something. If you want to get the most out of church, small group, podcasts you listen to, anything you're doing to pack your head full of information, you've got to get to the point that you're living it out and you're investing in other people. Because if you don't, it's all going to get boring. I don't care where you go to church. I don't care what you listen to. Eventually, you're going to say, I got to find some other place to get fed. It's all going to get boring eventually if you aren't giving out and pushing yourself and investing and exerting yourself. Because when you exert yourself, all of a sudden you're hungry. You ever been in that situation where you've just really exerted yourself and just worked hard and you're just exhausted, and finally you sit down in front of some food, and if it's not skunk meat, it's the greatest thing in the world, right? I mean, you're just like, this is awesome. When I was about 10 years old, my dad said, look, we're going to go hiking. He planned out this great hiking trip. We went down somewhere around Gallenberg. We just started hiking, and we're backpacking, and we're going to set up camp. And I mean, we hiked forever. As a 10-year-old, I was just like, man, I am just so exhausted. We got, of course, when we stopped, I'm like, okay, let's eat. And Dad's like, no, we got to set up the tent. I'm like, oh. So finally, my dad opens up something that changed my world: a can of Dinty Moore beef stew. Now, here's the thing about that. If I was just sitting in the comfort of my home and I had, I hadn't really overexerted myself, I would have looked at it and said, Dad, I think I see peas on the picture on the front of that. I'm not eating that. There are peas in that. No, thank you. So, and now, even now, I know that like Dinty Moore beef stew, like, I don't think that's the top of the line meat. Like, I think there's a place where like all the fancy meat goes, and then there's a chute where this meat goes, and they're like, okay, like, is this just good enough quality to not go down the dog food chute? No, yeah, let's put it in the beef stew chute. I mean, really, it's not quality meat. It's kind of pressed and it's kind of like reformed, that kind of stuff. And it's not good. And even now, like, I don't eat Dinty Moore beef stew on a regular basis because it's, nutritionally, like, it's probably not great for you. And it's not really even good food. But if I came to your house today and you said, we're having Dinty Moore beef stew, I would say, I love that stuff. Because that day, I lapped that stuff up and I fell in love with Dinty Moore beef stew because I had exerted myself. I had worked. I had gone out and given out, and therefore I wanted to take in. You will get so much more out of what you're learning if you're exerting yourself and putting into practice and leading other people. Now, if you're not a Christ follower here this morning, some of this may kind of be a stumbling block for you. You may have thought, yeah, the more you know, the more you grow. And all these people around me and all these people that I meet that are Christians, they seem to know so much about the Bible. And I could never do that. Like, I open the Bible, it doesn't make a ton of sense. And we kind of sent that message to you that the more you know, the more you grow. That's kind of the vibe that you've gotten from Christians. Or maybe you got the opposite. Maybe you know all these Christians that know so much and you don't see them living it out and you don't see them making a difference in the world. You're like, man, I don't know that I want any part of that. It's not about how much you know. It's about walking with Jesus and living out the mission that he's given us. And that just starts with just handing your life over to him. Just saying, man, Jesus died on the cross to pay for my sins, give me the opportunity to be right with God. And so I trust him enough to hand my life over to him and begin following him. And we'd love to talk to you about that. Listen, I will promise you, this is a promise I will make you at any of our campuses. You are in the safest place on the planet to check a connection card and say, I would like to have a conversation about a relationship with God. We are churches that you can come here for the rest of your life, and every Sunday you can walk in, you can look at the preacher and say, I totally disagree with everything you all teach here, and we will give you a hug and say, we love you. You're part of our family. We're glad you're here. Nobody is going to shove anything down your throat. If we present what the Bible has to say about how to have a relationship with God, and you say, I'm not doing that. It's not going to get weird. It's not going to get awkward. All of a sudden, the attitude's not going to change. I promise you, we literally just would like to show you what God has to say and leave that opportunity up to you. Listen, knowing is important. Knowing is important, but it is not the sole catalyst for your spiritual growth. Maturity is gauged by the goal. And the goal is to make disciples that make disciples. And if that's not happening, you're not mature. That's why as a church, we talk about that we are leading people into a growing relationship with Jesus Christ. And we say that we do that by encountering God. You first have got to have that initial encounter with God. Some of you have never taken that step that I just talked about. You don't have a relationship with God. But then on a regular basis, you need to be encountering God if you do have a relationship with God. And on Sunday mornings, that's what we do corporately as a church. We encounter God. But you got to move on to experiencing community. You have that team of people around you that is supporting you and cheering you on and helping keep you focused in the right direction. We need that. And so that community groups is a huge part of that for us. But you need that. You need that team of people around you. But then we don't stop there. It's never, ever, ever going to stop there in our churches. We want you to stay focused on that end goal of engaging the culture. Until you are investing in other people and until you are giving out what you're learning, until you're taking on the care of other people and feeding other people, you are not mature. And that's what this passage shows us, is that we're missing that. That's why the writer of Hebrews says, by now you should be feeding other people. Just showing up every Sunday and saying, yeah, feed me, feed me, feed me, feed me, feed me. Who does that? Infants. Feed me, feed me, feed me, feed me. Feed yourself, feed other people, and live it out. At the bottom of your listening guide, you've got some opportunities there to go deeper. That's one of the things that we've kind of started adding along the way so that you can go home and you can feed yourself. And this week, some of the things are start a plan on the Bible app. Start a Bible reading plan on the Bible app. Start feeding yourself. Read the links that we put up on the Facebook page last week on the Springbrook Northridge Facebook page. Read the link about having a quiet time with God. And also, we reposted a blog that I wrote a while back called "The Church You're Looking For May Not Be the Church You Need." Some of you may be here this morning and you're a first-time guest and you're trying to figure out what church do I need to be at? And you're looking at through a certain criteria that, like I said earlier, we've been taught throughout the years. And so you're saying, well, where can I be fed? Where can I be fed? Where can I be fed? The question might be, where can I just be unleashed missionally? Maybe the church that you're looking for is not actually the church that you need. And so take a look at that as well, and then start serving and start investing in someone. This week, wake up tomorrow morning and pray, God, who at my work do I need to just start hanging out with more? Who at my work do I need to start investing in? Who at my work do I just need to say, hey, let's catch lunch. Let's just go out and just hang out. Let's get lunch together. Who do I need to just start investing in? Maybe it's your kid's coach. Just ought to have them over to the house and say, hey, thanks for coaching. We'd love to have you over for dinner. We'd love to get to know you some more. Who can I begin to invest in? Let's keep the right focus on what it really means to be mature. Let's not buy the lie that just because you know more, you're growing more. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for the example that you set for us. Just even how Jesus discipled his disciples, the way that he constantly was just throwing them out there and saying, man, guys, go do it. Go get it done. And it challenged them. It made them hungry. God, I pray for every person in this room that they would have a holistic view of what it means to grow spiritually, that it wouldn't just stop with, I just guess I need to know some more. Or maybe I could try to find some teaching that sounds a little different or a little deeper or kind of says it in a different way than what I'm used to hearing. And now I'm growing again because it just sounds different. No, God, help us to take that whole approach of feeding ourselves and of course accepting feeding from other people, but feeding ourselves, feeding other people and making sure that we are serious about living it out. That we wouldn't be as so common in the South where we say things, well, I know what the Bible says, but... that we would actually say, I know what the Bible says, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to live it out. By God's help, with God's power working through me, by that daily connection that I have with him as I feed myself, I'm going to live this out and I'm going to invest it in other people. God, help us to continue to be a church that regularly encounters God, that experiences community together, that builds us up, and that above all things, engages the culture. It will keep us hungry and desperate for what you want to tell us next, because we realize we have other people depending on us spiritually. God, we love you. God, I pray for anybody here today that doesn't have a relationship with you, that they really would just check that card and just say, man, what does it hurt to have a conversation about what it means to have a relationship with you? We love you, God. Thank you for the sacrifice of your son for us and the way that he radically changes us. God, we just worship you in this time. Pray in Christ's name. Amen.